I'm just going to say a few words about Holocaust Memorial Day, and today specifically marks 70 years since the liberation of Auschwitz in 1945. Auschwitz is one of those names that is synonymous with human suffering and bleakness, and even today it's a very bleak place. There were emotional scenes there and also commemoration services involving high profile people such as Prince Charles and David Cameron in Westminster Abbey. But particularly moving scenes at Auschwitz itself, where survivors met and recollected their experiences. They were all young children at the time. One man in particular, I remember, he said that he'd come from a relatively wealthy family, and his father was quite well known in the community, but when his parents were denounced, it was by a man whom his father had been friends with for 20 years. This was in Kristallnacht. So it's very sinister to think the power the totalitarian regimes have in brainwashing people. There's a few angles I want to take with this video. I think Holocaust Memorial Day, Shoah Day, as it is in Hebrew, should remind us of particularly the Holocaust, but also some of the other atrocities that have happened in the 20th century and onwards, before as well of course, but the 20th century especially was it's been called the worst century in history and the best century in history for a range of reasons. You have the Shoah, but in more recent times there's also been Cambodia, Burundi, Guatemala, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, and this goes on and on. Syria is perhaps the most recent example, but of course the term genocide itself is a controversial term. One of the most controversial genocide debates is Armenia, which is said to be the second most studied after the Shoah. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into the whole debate arena of this, because I think well, I don't think there's much more I can contribute to that, except to say this. My theory about conspiracy theories around the Shoah, there are still a small but very vocal group of people out there who usually come on cyberspace and say that it was all invented. It's one big Jewish conspiracy to control the banking system with the Holocaust myth and so on. This is very... what I'd like to say to those people is speak to the survivors and say to their face that they are lying. I mean, they're pretty good actors if they're making it up. So I just think it's an odious claim. And I think that's to be expected, though. When you have something that is on such a big scale, there's always going to be some people who just can't fathom it. It's a bit like in China. There's still people who try to say that Tiananmen Square was a Western invention, and that was a much smaller scale than the Shoah. So, you know, when things happen, there's nationalism gets in the way, but it isn't just the far right in Germany. It's far right all over the world try to say it's one big conspiracy theory, which I find odious. Because it's one of the most exhaustively researched events in human history, and one of the worst crimes in human history. Like I should say, it should remind us of other genocides, but also totalitarianism. We should never forget what happened under the Third Reich, but we shouldn't overlook other crimes of the 20th century, and I think we do. Especially Mao's regime in China. Most people in the West sort of think, oh yeah, he was a dictator, but I don't think people realise just how terrible his regime was. Many people in China know this, but even today there's still a lot of propaganda that defends his regime within China. And one reason I think there's been a different response in China, as there has in Germany or even Russia, to Stalin to some extent, is that in China the same ruling party that was there when Mao was in power is still in power. So it figures that they're not going to, you know, they feel it will damage them if they allow the full truth of Mao to be known. but the truth is many Chinese know full well what happened in those dark days of the 60s and 70s. The Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, were among the darkest chapters in human history, and I believe that democratic countries should remember all the atrocities of totalitarian regimes to show that democracy is fragile. It is fragile. There's been a lot of talk from leading politicians, and it's good that they're doing this, but about society being tolerant and diverse and so on, but there also needs to be legislation needs to be enforced, because a few days ago I heard about a Jewish man who was attacked in Gateshead, which is a town not far from where I live, by a gang of Muslim youths. Now, there is a minority of Muslims, actually I don't know if it is a minority, but just like the Holocaust conspiracy theorists, these people blame all Jews for the actions of the State of Israel. Now, I've always defended criticism of Israel. I've defended the right to criticise, although my own position is somewhat, I think I'm more objective than some people on this subject. But when it comes to Israel, criticism and protest, peaceful protest, is entirely legitimate. But tarring all Jewish people with one brush for the actions of Israel is no better than attacking all Muslims for the actions of Islamic State. Jewish people are just as diverse as any group of people. You have conservative Jews, liberal Jews, atheist Jews, religious Jews. Nobody should be having to live in fear because of what they're wearing. I heard there was a barber in Israel who's actually designed a skull cap that looks like hair, that blends in, so that Jewish men can wear that without fearing attack. It's disgraceful that this is happening in modern Germany. And of course Merkel and Hollande and Cameron and all the other leaders strongly condemn it, but this really needs to be enforced. It's sickening that someone could be harassed and bullied in that way by gutless little cards simply for... And incidentally, this isn't that, I know some Muslim people say that anti-Muslim crime is ignored. I don't think it's ignored. It's equally wrong. So if an elderly imam is attacked, or a Muslim woman has a veil ripped off her face, I think that's sickening as well. I condemn all sorts of bigotry and hostility like that. It sickens me. But that doesn't mean that any religion is above criticism. It doesn't mean that Islam or Judaism or Christianity is above criticism. A civil society must try and protect everybody, but also not protect them so much that any group is above criticism. But then again, we need to be wary of this term group. So I know that at the moment there's a lot of controversy. A lot of Muslim people feel they're all being tarred with the same brush because of the actions of ISIS. And usually when there's a big Islamist terror attack, the response I see is, but we're not all terrorists. My response would be, most level-headed people realise that, but there is unquestionably a problem within Islam that is deeply intolerant and goes against all the principles I've been talking about here, and is actually totalitarian. So that needs to be spoken out against. Anyway, I'll leave it there. This isn't intended to be an overtly political video, a more reflective video, because what happened in the Shoah was unimaginable. It's 70 years is a long time, but not so long that it's within the reach of our conscience. Yeah.